Dim the lights and let the world fall away. You're entering DreadLoop, Creepypasta, where the silence feels heavier, and every story pulls you deeper into the dark. If you enjoy these dark stories, subscribe, and return when the night feels longest. Now settle and breathe slowly, and listen closely. Tonight's tale begins now. The job came up on a Tuesday, and I took it by Thursday. That's how fast things moved when you were 3 months behind on rent and your car had started, making a sound like a coin rolling inside a dryer. My cousin Marco knew a guy who knew a guy, and the guy was a regional manager for a chain of independent fuel stops that nobody had ever heard of because their stations sat in places most people drove through without slowing down. He said the pay was $14 an hour, which wasn't much, but it came with a trailer behind the station, free, and no one would bother me about paperwork until the 90-day mark. I didn't have 90 days of paperwork in me. I took it. The station was in a stretch of eastern Oregon that I can only describe as a color. The nearest town was called Halden and had a population somewhere under 400. The station sat 11 miles outside of it. A cattle fence that ran parallel to the east road and didn't contain any cattle. At night you could stand in the parking lot and see more stars than you had any use for. The station itself was 2 pumps, a small convenience store, a bathroom around the side with a key on a wooden paddle, and a back room with the safe and the MOP sink. The trailer behind it was a single wide from the 70s, with a working stove and a shower that made the kind of noises showers make when they're thinking about dying. The manager who showed me around was a man named Kurt who wore a windbreaker even though it was August, and he moved through the store like someone who had memorized the distance between every shelf. He showed me the register, the cigarette cage, the lottery machine, the coffee station. He showed me how to do the shift close out on the little printer. He was patient in a way that made me nervous, because I had worked enough retail to know that patience in a manager usually meant they were counting down the minutes until they could leave you alone with something they didn't want to explain. At the end of the tour, he took a laminated piece of paper out from under the counter and set it in front of me. The laminate was old. The paper had a list of rules printed on it in a cheap font, the kind you get when you use the default on a word processor from 2003. There were 9 rules. He watched me read them. I remember the first one was about the overnight delivery. The supplier dropped pallets at 2:40 in the morning on Mondays and Thursdays, and I was to stay inside the store with the door locked until the truck left. I wasn't to sign anything. Machine. Fine. Weird, but fine. I'd worked at places with stranger protocols. There had been a sandwich shop in Boise where we were told never to use the back door after 6 because of a property dispute with the neighbor that involved a lawyer and a dog. The second rule was about the bathroom. The outside bathroom key lived on a hook behind the counter. If a customer asked for it and they were alone, I gave it to them. If a customer asked for it and they had a passenger in the car, I was to tell them the bathroom was out of order. Even if it wasn't. I read that one twice. Kurt didn't react. I moved on. The third rule was that if the power flickered 3 times in a row, I was to turn off the outside sign, lock the door, and sit in the back room until the generator kicked in or the sun came up. Whichever came first. The fourth rule was that the coffee pot stayed on all night. Always, even if nobody came in. Even if I wasn't drinking it. If it ran dry, I was to brew another pot immediately, regardless of the hour. The fifth was about man. The rule said, a regular will come in sometime after midnight. He drives a blue pickup with a camper shell. He'll buy a pack of Pall Malls and a bottle of orange Gatorade. Don't tell him yours. The sixth was about the road. If I saw headlights coming from the east between 3 and 4 in the morning, and they didn't reach the pumps within 10 minutes of first sighting, the little radio under the counter was tuned to a station out of Burns. I was not to change the station. If the station went to static, I was to turn the radio off entirely and leave it off until my shift ended. The 8th was about the ice machine. I wasn't to open it after dark. Deliveries of ice came during the day. If the machine was empty at night, it stayed empty until morning dot, and then there was the bottom of the page. It said 9 at the left margin with a period after it, but the space beside it was blank. Just a clean stretch of laminated paper where the 9th rule should have been. The 8th rule ended, the 9 appeared with its period, and then nothing. Like someone had meant to type it and walked away from the keyboard. I pointed at it. I said, "What's 9? Kurt looked at the page like he hadn't noticed it before, which I don't think was true. Then he said, "That one doesn't apply to you." And he took the laminate back and put it under the counter and moved on to showing me how to clean the nozzles on the pumps. Should have pushed. I know that now. At the time I was tired and I was relieved to have a job. And I thought the blank rule was probably a print-in error or a rule that used to apply to a different location and had been removed because it wasn't relevant anymore. Rules lists at places like that got updated in weird ways. Somebody at a corporate office would decide that the rule about not selling beer to anyone in a cowboy hat no longer made sense. It out or leave it blank. I told myself that. I believed it for about 2 weeks. My shift was 9 at night to 7 in the morning, 6 nights a week. I had Mondays off. I learned the rhythm of the pumps. I met the Pall Mall man on my 3rd night. He was exactly as described. He came in around 1:15, nodded at me, got his cigarettes and his Gatorade, put a crumpled 20 on the counter, took his change, and left. He didn't speak. There's something restful about a person who has been doing the same small thing for long enough that it's become a kind of prayer. The delivery came on Thursday, and I locked the door at 2:30 like I'd been told, and sat behind the counter and watched the headlights of the big truck come down the east road and pull around the back of the building. I heard the beeping of the reverse alarm, the hydraulic wheeze, the thump of pallets being set down. I didn't see the driver. He didn't come to the door. Minutes before I unlocked the door and went out to find the manifest under the rock by the ice machine, exactly where Kurt had said it would be. It was a receipt for 12 cases of motor oil, 8 of antifreeze, and 40 cartons of cigarettes. The handwriting at the bottom was a signature I couldn't read. I put it in the drawer by the register and finished my shift and went home too. The trailer and slept through the afternoon. That was how the first 2 weeks went. Quiet, manageable, the kind of job you could do while listening to an audiobook in the part of your brain that wasn't counting cash. The unease started with the coffee pot. I had kept it going the way Kurt said. It wasn't hard. I brewed a fresh pot around midnight, another around 3, another around 5. Most of it I poured out in the morning, because nobody came in to drink it. A trucker now and then, but truckers usually had their own thermoses. The coffee was for the pot to be on, not for anyone to drink. I understood that. It was a thing. The station did, like leaving a porch light burning for a son who was never coming home. One night I forgot. Not the whole pot. I just missed a cycle. I was restocking the cooler, and I lost track of time. And when I came back to the counter, I realized the pot had been empty for maybe 40 minutes. I felt a little spike of guilt, like I'd failed at something trivial, and I brewed a new pot. The machine made its normal noises. The coffee came out the color of coffee. I thought nothing more about it. About 10 minutes later, I heard the door chime. I looked up. Nobody had come in. The door was closed. The bell above it was still, but it had rung. I'd heard it clearly. Empty. The parking lot was empty. The east road was empty. The west road was empty. I stood there a minute, and then I came back inside, and I looked at the coffee pot, and it was full and fine. The bell moved, but no one passed through it. I stood with a can of refrigerated biscuits in my hand, and I watched the bell settle back to still. I just didn't want to. The chime didn't ring again that night. In the morning I asked Kurt about it when he came by to collect the deposit. I said the door chime rang twice last night when nobody was there. He said, "Did you let the coffee run out?" I sighed, "Okay." He didn't explain. I didn't ask. After that, I didn't miss a pot. The Pall Mall man came in almost every night. He was consistent in what he bought and inconsistent in when he showed up, which made him feel more real than most regulars. I started nodding at him when he came in, and after the second week he started nodding back. I never said a word to him. He never said a word to me, but I liked him. He was the only person I saw most nights, and I started to feel, in a way I couldn't justify, that as long as he kept coming, the station was operating the way it was supposed to. The headlights came in my fourth week. I was sitting behind the counter, and it was a few minutes after 3, and I saw a pair of headlights crest the rise on the East Road. They were still a long way out. You could see pretty far on that road because it was straight and flat. I watched them, the way I watched every pair of headlights, and after a minute I realized they weren't getting any closer. They weren't getting any farther either. They were just sitting there at the top of the rise. I looked at the clock. 3:04. I waited. 3:06. They hadn't moved. 3:09. Still there. 3:12. Still there. At 3:13. I got up from the stool and I went to the back room and I locked the door behind me and I sat on the floor with my back against the shelving unit, and I could hear. I waited for what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes. Then I opened the door and came back out. The headlights were gone. I went to the window. The East Road was empty. I went outside and walked to the pumps and looked east. No sound of an engine. Whatever had been at the top of the rise had either reversed very slowly back the way it came. I drove the quarter-mile around the back of the station to my trailer, and I went inside, and I locked the door, and I slept with the lights on. The next night I was careful. I watched the East Road the way you watch a pot of water you don't want to boil over. Nothing happened. I started to relax. I started to think maybe someone had been lost and pulled over to check a map, and maybe I had overreacted, and maybe the rules list was just paranoid, written by a previous manager who had been having a bad decade. And then I noticed the thing. With the bathroom. It was a woman in a station wagon. She pulled in around 10 at night, which is earlier than most of my strange customers, and she came in and asked for the bathroom key. I looked out the window. There was a man in the passenger seat. He was looking at his phone. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was just a person in a car. I told her the bathroom was out of order. She looked at me like I'd insulted her. She said, "The sign on the door says it works." And I watched her get back in the car, and I watched the car pull away. I was fine. I went back to stocking. About 4 hours later, I went outside to empty the trash, and I walked past the bathroom, and the door was ajar. Not much, maybe 2 inches. I always locked it. It was a habit. The light was off. The sink was dry. The stall was empty. Everything was exactly the way I'd left it. The key was still on its hook behind the counter. When I was closing out the register, I found myself looking at the laminated page again. But when I tilted the laminate under the fluorescent light, I could see faint impressions in the paper underneath, like something had been typed there and then covered over. The laminate was old enough that the ink had come through a little, or the pressure of the typing had left marks. I couldn't read any of the letters, but I could see that there had been words. A whole line of them. Maybe 2 lines. Somebody had removed Rule 9. Not forgotten to write it. Removed it. I put the laminate back. I finished the closeout. I went home and I slept badly, and when I got up I drove into Halden for groceries, which I hadn't done before because I'd been ordering everything through the delivery driver. I wanted to see people. I wanted to stand in a store with other human beings and buy a bag of oranges. The clerk at the grocery store in Halden was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. She rang up my oranges and my bread and my eggs and my coffee, and she said, "You the new kid out at the junction station?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "How long you been there?" She bagged my groceries. She told me my total. I paid. As she handed me my change, she said, "The last kid lasted 7 weeks. The one before that, 3 months. You let me know if you need anything." I said, "What happened to them?" She looked at me over her reading glasses. She said, "They quit. Everybody quits. It's a lonely place to work." She said it in a tone that was friendly and flat at the same time. And I knew she was telling me something true, but not the thing I'd asked. I took my groceries, and I went back to the trailer. That was a Monday. My day off. I spent most of it on my phone trying to find any information about the station online, and I couldn't find anything useful. The chain had a bare-bones website with a list of locations. The junction station was on the list. There was a phone number that rang to a voicemail. There were no reviews because no one reviewed gas stations in the middle of nowhere. I tried to search for the names of previous employees, and I had no names to search. I gave up around dinner time and ate cereal and watched a movie on my laptop and went to bed. On Tuesday, I was back at work. It was around 1 in the morning when the Pall Mall man came in. He did what he always did. He walked to the cigarette case, and he pointed, and I got the pack. He walked to the cooler and got an orange Gatorade. He came to the counter. He put a 20 down, but this time when I handed him his change, he looked at me. He looked at me for longer than he ever had. Long. Enough that I felt my neck get warm. Then he said very quietly, in a voice I had never heard him use, because I'd never heard him use any voice. He said, "When it asks you, don't answer." Then he picked up his Gatorade and his cigarettes. It was full. I looked at the radio. It was on, playing something low and countryish out of Burns. I looked at the door. I thought about Kurt saying, "That one doesn't apply to you." The rest of the shift passed without anything happening. I watched the East Road. I watched the West Road. I checked the bathroom door twice without letting myself acknowledge that I was checking it. No headlights came, no chime rang. The Pall Mall man did not return, which he never did in a single night. But I was hoping anyway, and he didn't. And eventually the sky began to pale, and I closed out the register, and I went home, and I didn't sleep. I thought about quitting. I didn't quit. I want to be honest about that. I was still 3 months behind on rent back in the place I'd come from. I had a trailer behind the station that I didn't pay for. I had a job that paid on time. The alternative was to drive back to the city and sleep in my car until I could find something else, and I wasn't ready for that. I told myself that the Pall Mall man was probably just a weird lonely man saying a weird lonely thing. I told myself that people out there got strange in the head. I told myself a lot of things. I went back to work that night. It was a Wednesday. Nothing happened on Wednesday. Nothing happened on Thursday except the delivery, which went the way deliveries always went. Nothing happened on Friday. Saturday was when the phone rang. The station had a landline. It was in my 7 weeks at the station, it had rung exactly twice. Both times during the day. Both times it was Kurt checking in. I didn't even think of it as a working phone. I thought of it as furniture. It rang at 3:17 in the morning. I looked at it. I let it ring 4 times. I thought, it's Kurt, something's wrong, I should pick it up. I reached for it. Then I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe because of what the Pall Mall man had said. Maybe because the phone had never rung at night before, and I had been at the station long enough to know that things that had never happened before were things to be afraid of. Maybe because the radio had gone to static about 10 seconds before the phone rang, and I had turned it off without quite registering that I'd done it. And now the only sound in the store was the ringing of the phone and the hum of the coolers. Let it ring. It rang 11 times. Then it stopped. I stood behind the counter and I didn't move. The station was very quiet. I could see my own reflection in the window, and behind my reflection, the dark shape of the pumps and the road beyond them. The phone rang again. I didn't pick it up. It rang 11 times again. Then it stopped. The third time it rang, something was different. I can't tell you exactly what. The rings sounded the same. The room looked the same. But I had the absolute physical sensation that someone was standing just outside the door, listening to the phone ring, waiting to hear whether I would pick up. I counted the rings. 11. Then it stopped. It did not ring a fourth time. I stood there for the rest of the shift. I did not move from behind the counter. I did not brew another pot of coffee when the one in the maker went stale. And I am grateful that no chime rang, because I don't know what I would have done. When the sun came up, I closed out the register with hands that were not quite steady, and I walked to my trailer, and I packed my things. It took me about 40 minutes. I didn't have much. I left the trailer key on the kitchen counter. I drove into Halden, and I stopped at the grocery store, and I went in, and I found the woman with the reading glasses, and I said, "I'm quitting. Can you tell Kurt?" She said, "Sure, hun." I said, "Can I ask you something?" She said, "You can ask." I said, "What was Rule 9?" She took off her reading glasses and let them hang on the chain. She looked at me for a while. Then she said, "I don't know. I never worked there. But I know there used to be a Rule 9, and I know they stopped printing it about 4 years ago, after a boy named Dale didn't come in for his shift one morning. They found his truck at the station. They didn't find him." I said, "What do you mean they didn't find him?" She said, "I mean they didn't find him." And the Rule 9 got taken off the list a week later, and the new kids who came in after that, nobody told them what it used to say. I think Kurt decided it was better if they didn't know. I think he figured, if there's no rule, there's nothing for the thing to test you on. I said, "What do you mean test?" She said, "Honey, I don't know. I've lived here my whole life. There's things at that junction that have been there longer than the station has. The rules were put up to keep the station working. Most of them are just polite ways of saying, don't give it an opening. Rule 9 was about the phone, I think. That's what I heard. That's what Dale's sister told me once at the Christmas thing. She said the rule was about the phone." I said, "What was the rule?" She said, "I don't know the exact wording, but it was something like, if the phone rings between 3 and 4 in the morning, don't answer it and don't let it ring more than 10 times. I said it rang 11. She looked at me. I said, I didn't answer. But it rang 11 times, 3 times. She put her reading glasses back on. She said, "You should go home, hun, wherever home is. You should go today, and you shouldn't come back this way." I drove out of Halden that afternoon. I drove west until I hit the coast, and then I drove south along the coast for 2 days, and then I turned inland and drove until I couldn't drive anymore. A job at a hardware store. I have a room in a house with 3 other people. I am behind on rent again, but only by a little, and I am not behind in a way that would ever send me back to Eastern Oregon. The phone in my room doesn't ring at night, because I don't have a phone in my room. I use my cell, and I keep it on silent, and I check it in the morning. Most mornings there's nothing, but twice, in the last 6 months, I have woken up to a missed call from a number I don't recognize, logged at some time between 3 and 4 in the morning. The number has no area code listed. The call log just says the digits, and the digits are not a real phone number. They are too many or too few. I haven't counted. I don't want to count. I don't call back. I won't call back. But I have noticed, in a way I try not to notice, that the gap between the calls is getting shorter. The first one came about 4 months after I left. The second one came 6 weeks after that. If the pattern holds, there will be another one in about 3 weeks, and then another one sooner after that. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it, because I didn't answer. I did the thing the Pall Mall man told me to do. I did the thing the missing rule would have told me to do if it had still been on the list, but I let it ring 11 times. 3 times, and I think that was enough. I think letting it ring, while knowing it was there, while listening to every ring, is its own kind of answer. I think that's what Rule 9 was really about, not picking up. Not letting it ring either. I think Rule 9 said, if the phone starts ringing, take it off the hook before the 4th ring, and leave it off until morning. I think Dale answered it. I think the boys before me didn't let it ring long enough to find out. I think I did something in between, and I think the thing at the junction has been trying to figure out, since that night, what exactly I am. I leave my phone face down now. I don't look at it between 3 and 4. I have started sleeping with the lamp on, which I haven't done since I was 9 years old. I tell myself I'm being paranoid. I tell myself the calls are a wrong number, a spam line, a coincidence. But last week the woman in the room next to mine asked me, over breakfast, whether I'd had someone over the night before. She said she'd heard a man's voice through the wall. Around 3 in the morning, very quiet. Like someone talking on the phone. I told her no. I told her I live alone. I told her I must have been talking in my sleep, she said. It didn't sound like you. I haven't slept well since. I don't know what Rule 9 said. Not exactly. I only know what the woman in Halden thought it said, and she was going off something she'd heard at a Christmas party from the sister of a boy who disappeared. That's a long chain of telephone. That's a lot of room for the real rule to have been something else, but I think about it every night now. I think about the blank space on the laminate, and the faint pressure of letters that had been typed and then covered over, and the way Kurt had looked at me when I'd pointed at it, and the way he had said that one doesn't apply to you. He was wrong. It applied to me. It just hadn't been printed yet.